Hey guys, it's George. So, I got a couple of friends who are getting into photography and starting to take pictures, and they bought a couple of cameras. And they were asking me what they should use to edit their pictures or to catalog their pictures. A lot of them use an iPhoto. And there was a special on Amazon for Lightroom 3 for $89, $90, which was a really, really, really good deal. And I told them all to get that. Also, so some of my friends got that Lightroom, and I thought I'd show them a little bit of a intro into what Lightroom can do, and that's what this video is going to be about. So this is just going to be basically me editing a picture that I took, just to show you kind of what the sliders do. And I'll go through all the sliders, maybe even talk about why Lightroom is better than, say, why I think for a beginning photographer, someone who's not going to go, I mean, I use Photoshop all the time, and I use Lightroom as well, but for somebody who's not really going to get too deep into Photoshop, people were asking me about Photoshop Elements, and while Photoshop Elements is really great, I think the benefits you get from Lightroom are better than buying Photoshop Elements. Now, if you were going to buy the full Photoshop version, which is what I use, I would definitely say Photoshop is much, much more powerful than Lightroom, but it also takes a lot more it's got a higher learning curve, and for people doing family pictures and a lot of that stuff, usually even iPhoto is good enough, but I do recommend Lightroom. It's got some features that you just can't get with a lot of the other software. I mean, it's got all the camera raw features and the actual editing features that, say, Adobe, iPhoto doesn't have. So let me just kind of show you real quick on my computer kind of what I mean, and bring it into full screen mode. Basically, this is a picture I took at Occupy LA, and that's one of the parts of Lightroom is this cataloging. So let's say you went out, and like I did, I went out and went to Occupy LA, and I took all of these pictures, and I'm able to import them into their own collection. So I can always come here, find out Occupy LA 2011, click on it, and it brings me to my catalog for that shoot. Now that is one very powerful part of Lightroom, is the cataloging part, not just the editing part, which Adobe Photoshop Elements does not have, or even Photoshop. You can use Bridge, but it's really not the same thing. You still have to organize your files on your own when you use that, where if you have Lightroom, it organizes them for you. Now, I use Lightroom to organize and to do basic editing, and I also will go into Photoshop to do any more editing or retouching or any kind of specialty stuff that I need to do into all these pictures. But for most people, Lightroom would be more than enough. So once you get your catalog, and I do recommend shooting RAW if you're going to have Lightroom. If you're going to get Lightroom, shoot in RAW. There's no question about it. If you're not going to have a Lightroom or a software where you can edit pictures, then JPEG is the way to go. But when you shoot JPEG, you have to make sure you get your white balance and your settings and your camera settings and the way it handles your files correct in camera, because you cannot change that afterwards. I mean, once it saves it, it burns that information into the JPEG file and it's done. Where if you shoot RAW, it actually doesn't. It just shoots the RAW file, and when you bring it into, say, Lightroom, that's where you apply all those settings, and you can change them at any time. So, for example, I shot this image of this girl. Okay, so once you bring this in, once you have your catalog, then you can double click on a specific image that you want to edit, like say this one of this girl, and up at the top up here you have your like panels or whatever. These are like library is obviously your library where you keep all your images, and it gives you information on your photo. I mean, this side over here, the left side, gives you information on your computer and where your files are. So like up here, the catalog shows me my previous import. If I've made a quick collection, all my photographs. Excuse me. This right here shows me folders where I have all of my photography. I have them all organized by year, and I have these old iPhoto images that I've put in here. These are the collections that I make. So whenever I take a shoot, I will make a collection. For example, I did a Grand Canyon. I've done an LA Zoo a couple of times. I did a Miramar Air Show. So, as I do a specific shoot, like Occupy LA, I'll just make a collection so I can go back to it at any time. Down here, it has publish services, and that basically you can publish to your online sources. Like I have 2 Facebook folders, My Photography 1 and My Photography 2, and the only reason I have 2 is because there's a 200 image limit in Facebook, so I had to start over. And then basically once you edit your picture, you can drag it into you drag it into your publish service, and it'll actually publish it onto Facebook by itself. So now let's I'm going to move on to develop, but I just want a slideshow is to make a quick slideshow. You can select a bunch of images and it'll make a quick slideshow, and you can post it online. Print, if you want to print to a printer, color printer, and web, it'll actually make a web gallery for you. I actually don't use those very much because I print out of Photoshop and I don't really do slideshows or web galleries, but if I ever did, that's what I would use. But the interesting part about, okay, so in the library file on this side, it gives you some information as well. The histogram shows you your histogram for this image. It also shows me what ISO, what millimeter, what aperture, and what shutter speed I shot it at. It gives me keywording so I can type in some keywords so that it's easier to find later on. That's what this whole area is. You scroll down a little bit, it gives me my metadata. It tells me what my file name is. If I give it a title, I title it in here. If I want to have a caption for my image, I have my copyright set up so that when I import it, it puts in my copyright. And it gives me all my camera information as well. The next thing I do is, okay, so once you have your image and you've selected, this is the image I want to shoot. I know I'm going to do some editing to it. She's got some marks on her face that I'm going to get rid of. So I'll bring it into the develop module over here. Once I bring it into develop module, things change a little bit. So now on this side I have presets, which like are pretty cool, like say creative antique, and it'll do it by itself. Like you can do all of these little presets by your, and there's tons of them. There's tons. There's black and white. Oh, sorry. Say there's black and white. There's all kinds of different ones. There's dark black and white. There's light black and white. There's high contrast. There's bleached out. So it's got all of these presets that are already here for you, and you can always make new presets. So if you do an editing to a picture that you say you want to save as a preset and apply it to other pictures, you can always save that over there. This is your history. It kind of shows you everything you end up doing to your picture. So as you start doing stuff to your picture, you'll start seeing it go up. Obviously, I've done some work on it a little bit. I went back to the beginning just to show you guys these things. And again, your collection, so where you got your image. That's that side. This side, again, gives me my histogram with my camera information. These are modules that I'll show you in a bit. And then this is your main screen. So the first thing I'm going to do, and this is one of the things I love about Lightroom, is you scroll down a little bit, and this is the first thing I do on every single image. In lens correction, I enable lens profile correction. And what that does is it finds the lens that I used to shoot this image. So I use my Sigma 70-200 f2.8, right? So it finds that, and it'll fix any problems that lens has. And they're not really problems, they're just distortions, vignetting, any of that stuff. So if you look at it real close, you'll see that it actually lightens up the corners because there was a little bit of vignetting, and it looks like it had a little bit of barrel distortion or pin cushioning, and it brought it back up. So and a lot of times when you'll say you shoot straight lines, your lines will be a little curved, And you do that, and all of a sudden it straightens it out because they've done all the tests and they figured out exactly how to fix these things. So that's something that I always will do. The next thing is this square right here is your crop. So if you click on it, it gives you your little crop, and you can, you know, if you want to crop into that area or something. And I'm going to crop in a little bit because I want to be a little closer to her face. So I'm probably going to crop somewhere around there. And then you hit enter, and it now crops it in. Now, again, it didn't destroy your image, so if you go back to here, it still shows you your image back here. That image is always there. All it does is it changes your display. And when you export it, it'll export your crop. The next thing I want to do, and this is the power of RAW, I want to change my white balance. Now, right here, in this first one, you have color or black and white. You can go straight to black and white if you want to make it a black and white image, and then you can play with it, but I'm going to leave this one as color. But the first thing I want to do is I want to change my white balance. Now, when I was shooting, it was kind of a cloudy day. So one thing I find is a lot of people put their cameras on auto ISO, on auto white balance, and shoot JPEG, and this is what it would give them. Not bad, actually, but if they would have put it on daylight, it would have given them that. If they would have put it on cloudy, it would have given them that. Now cloudy gets a little warmer because it adds a little orangey. I'm going to put it on shade. Shade is one I use a lot. It really warms up this image. Now, check this out. So that's before, that's after. So shade actually gave me a lot of a warmer image. It took away a lot of the blue and added a lot of yellow, which I liked. So that's a good start for this image. Also, you can bump your exposure right here. And that's the great thing about Lightroom is even if you don't know exactly what you want to do, you have all of these sliders kind of showing you what they are, and then you can just play with them. You know, if I want to lower my exposure to that, well, okay, so maybe I want a really dark image. Not to say that I'm going to, but, you know, if I want to blow out my image, I can do that too. Usually, if you get it right in camera, you don't have to move that too much. Sometimes you'll move it, say a couple of, maybe half a stop up or half a stop down, depending on what you did. Sometimes when you have like a really light background, let's say you're shooting a bird in the sky and the bird looks silhouetted and the sky looks really nice because your camera didn't correct for that, you can correct it here. That's the power of RAW. If you had this in JPEG, you would not be able to do that. It would be able to try to do that. It would manipulate the JPEG, but it's not the same thing. Recovery, what it does is anything that's blown out, any of the whites, look in here, that are blown out, it tries to bring them back. It'll darken them up. In this case, I don't want to do that. In this case, I actually like that area. Fill light will add light to all the dark areas. Now this image might have not been the best image to use for this because it was shot and I actually got a pretty good exposure on it, so I'm not going to be changing too much, but probably won't change the fill light because there's not too many darks. Oh, and see these in your histogram, you have these little triangles up here. This is your white, and if there was any clipping, let me show you, like if I overexpose this, if there's any white clipping and you click on it, all that red is showing you what is no longer information. It's just pure white clipped out. Same goes for the other side. If there was any black clipping, of course I can't get any, if there's any black clipping, it would show you this blue. See, it would show you all that blue if there was a lot of black clipping. All right, so let's go back to the image. Okay, so I do like to add a little bit of my blacks to give it a little contrast, so I'll bump that up to 10 on this image. Brightness and contrast, you can, I mean, they do exactly what you think. Brightness increases the brightness or lowers the brightness. Contrast increases the contrast or lowers the contrast. And then, you know, you can play with it. I like to contrast my images up a little bit. I don't use contrast as much, but you can. I use these curves. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. Clarity, what clarity does, and I'll show you if I get close up, it enhances the detail. Sometimes it enhances it too much, and if you lower clarity, it actually softens that detail. So if you see all her skin tone, this is normal. You see some of her skin, her actual texture. If you were to remove clarity, it kind of gets rid of that. Now, mind you, it does it to everything and it doesn't look really good. I don't actually like that. I hardly ever lower my clarity. I won't say never, but hardly. So I usually increase my clarity a little bit, probably like 20. Vibrance increases the punch of your images. So you can use that. I usually add a little bit of vibrance, not too much. I'll probably add like 5. And then saturation, it really saturates your colors. You gotta be very careful with saturation. I mean, if you bring it all the way down, it goes to black and white. There's no saturation. You can do kind of like a washed out, old school look, which actually doesn't look too bad. But if you go too far forward, it really... And I usually end up going, I don't know, a little bit of saturation I add. And every image is different, so it's hard to just like tell you guys to do it this way. Let me just check my time. Okay, 15 minutes. Okay, so this is where I was telling you about the curve. I will up the curve right here. I will raise the whites and lower the blacks, and essentially it gives me the same as contrast, where it'll contrast the image, but it gives me a little more control, and I like that. Let me show you what I did. Basically, see, it just added a lot of contrast. Actually, I think I added too much black. Yeah, so that's better. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. The next slider here is the luminance, the HSL, hue, saturation, luminance. Now, for each color in the image, you have a hue, a saturation, and a luminance, right? So now luminance, for example, let's find like this orange. If you bump up the luminance, it tries to bring up those oranges to white. If you lower them down, it tries to bring them to darkness. And it does that for every color. So if you have red in your image, if you have green in your image, it'll do that to all of those. And you can play with them individually to like really fine tune things you might want to, get into. Now hue, what it does is that actually will change. See, it's orange here, and if I wanted to change it, okay, I want to make my oranges more red. Okay, I can do that. I want to make my oranges more green. I can do that too. And I can do that with all of these colors. Now, granted, I use that very little. I actually use this more when I'm doing black and whites, because when you convert it to black and white using this button, right, you can still go back in here and play with these to lighten and darken the colors from the actual photograph in black and white. So all the colors that were orange, it still retains that information. I can make all the colors that were orange, let's say I want to make them really bright, or I want to make them really dark. I can do that. So that's a really powerful feature in that. The black and white, and using those to really fine tune. Split toning, sometimes when you want to add 2 colors to an image, you can click on and say you want to add a little green to your highlights and say a little blue to your shadows to give it kind of a weird vibe, and you can do all kinds of different colors. And you can switch the colors here, like let's say, okay, pink and blue, which is kind of a common one that, film used to do, and it kind of works well here. And that's what split toning kind of does, and you can play with that. I'm not going to do anything here. Sharpening is exactly what it says. It sharpens your image. Let me see if I can do before and after here. See, it just sharpens it just a little bit. Masking masks out and if you hold down Option, it gives you, see, all the things that are white is what's being sharpened. Everything that's black is not being sharpened. So if you lower your mask, a lot more is being sharpened. If you usually you want somewhere around there, so that what it's doing is it's sharpening the edges and not the texture in her face, because you don't want the texture in her face to be too sharp, but you definitely want the edges to be sharp. So that's what sharpening does. Noise reduction, I shot these at a pretty low ISO, 200, but if you were to shoot them at a high ISO, say you shot something at ISO 1600 or ISO 3200, and you had a lot of noise in your image and you wanted to reduce it, you could always use the noise reduction. You will see it even here. Look at this area right here. If I have no noise reduction, you can see the noise in there, and you can lower that noise. It actually, when you lower the noise, it does tend to lose a little bit of sharpness. So I tend to not use noise reduction unless it's a really, really noisy image, like an ISO 3200 or an ISO 6400. But I actually like noise, so I use it a lot less than people would think. Again, I already talked about lens corrections because that's the first thing I do, and then post-crop vignetting actually adds, you know, kind of vignette around the edges if you want that look, and you can change the midpoint value, change the roundness, maybe make it less round, maybe make it more round, change the feather, how hard it is, you know, if you want to make it a hard edge or a soft edge. So you can play with all of those. And you know, if you want to, if I use this at all, I will add a little bit of that. Just sometimes if I want to say draw your attention to the center of the image and I want to darken the edges, I'll add a little bit of that, but that's about it. I mean, I don't really use it quite as much. Actually, I don't use it pretty much at all, actually. Just because I like just simple images. And then this last thing we have here is called grain. And that adds grain. Most people are trying to remove it, but sometimes you want to add grain. So you have a nice cool black and white and you want to make it look like an old film noir image. Well, you can add a lot of grain, you know, and it'll make it look more like that old school film. Here I don't want to do that. So now let's see, what else do I want to do? Oh, get rid of that noise reduction because I don't like the way it does that. Okay, so now what I do want to show you is some of the like spot reduction or spot wow, how can I say this? Like if I want to remove little areas here, like say I want to remove some of these zits, this image right here, this little button right here is the, what's it called? It's called the spot removal. Okay, so if I click on it, it'll give me a little circle and I can use my brackets to make it smaller or bigger, or you can change the size up here, right? So, and then what you do is you click on what you want to remove and you drag to what you want to use as a, so let me show you. So it uses this area and it copies it onto this area, and then it tries to match the color. It does a pretty good job too. So basically I'll go in and I can go in and clean up all of these images and just, you know, like let's say I want to get rid of that little area right there and that area right there and this area right here, and she's got a little dark spot right there, and you know, you can spend as much time as you want on this and just clean up her entire face, you know, and you can just click, 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 and then if you hit the H key, it'll hide those little circles so you can see what you did. See, it totally cleaned it up, and then you hit H to bring them back. So that's the spot removal. Okay, so then you close that, and you can go back, and you can see that I got a little bit of problem there, so I can go back to it, and I can finesse. Maybe move that out there, no, right there. So there you go. So, you know, that looks pretty good. Next, this button is red eye reduction. Unfortunately, she doesn't have any red eye, but you know, sometimes when you take a picture with a camera flash and the red eye, this, you click on it, it gives you like a little circle. You click on that circle, it'll find the red eye, and it'll remove it. Obviously, it couldn't find the red eye, but if there was, it would clean that up. The next little button here is the graduated, what's it called? Graduated filter. Okay. So, and what this does is it lets you create a ramp. And it has these presets, exposure. Let's say you want to lower your exposure over here to darken this area. So you can drag and it'll darken this area. It can lighten that area. It'll, you know, contrast that area. So you can move all these sliders and only affect that area that you just put on there. And then you can move it around. You can delete it. I actually tend to use this a little bit as a color. I have a preset that I made called Sunlight Glow, where I added a little saturation, a little exposure, and a color. And what it does is if I bring it in, it gives me that like orangey tone, and I can do it from both sides. And I kind of like the effect it does. And you can change that color. You can make it green if you wanted, or you can make it kind of orangey, yellow, red, whatever color you feel like is gonna make it look good. That's what that graduated filter does. The next one is what is this called? This is called the adjustment brush. What this does is it basically lets you make the same adjustments that I just made on that graduated filter, except with a brush. So, for example, I use it for the eyes. Let's say you go to your adjustment brush, you have a preset set for iris enhance, where it enhances a little bit, and then you just paint it in. I did way too much just to show you, but if you see what I did, I added iris enhance, and it really brought up that iris. You know, you have your size of your brush, your density, it has all of these features. I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to show you what I would have done. I would have just gone in and whoa. Okay, so I would have, delete that. I would have gone in and added a little bit of glow to her eye. Maybe worked on the whites of her eyes, just a little bit to really bring out that eye. And I think that's pretty close to what I want in this image. You can even warm it up maybe a little bit more. So you want a really warm, sunny day. I think I'm gonna go somewhere around there. And I think that's what I'm gonna do with that image. So now, let's say this is your final image and you have it done. You can go back to your library, it saves it. Actually, I'm sorry, go to your develop. And like I told you in that history palette, it shows me everything I did, every little step that I pushed. I can go all the way back to the back and boom, right back where I started. Come all the way back up, and that's where I ended up. Okay, so now what I usually do is I'll go back to my library file. I can show my grid. And let's say I wanted to put it in Facebook, I can drag it over to my Facebook page. It'll put it up on my Facebook. If I wanted to print it, I can just hit print. It'll bring up my print dialog, and it'll print it, shows me my piece of paper and stuff. Anything you want to do, and you can add watermarks, you can do anything you want. Now, I don't want to get into everything, but that's kind of the basic thing that you can do in this one. Looks pretty close to the other one. This one I edited in Photoshop. You see I did a little more skin work in Photoshop. Let me show you the one I did. This is Photoshop, this is Lightroom. So, I mean, it's pretty close what you can do in Lightroom and in Photoshop. I got a little more detail in Photoshop, but that's to be expected. But, considering, I think that's pretty close and pretty impressive. So, I hope you enjoyed this little, what am I at, like 30 minutes now? Yeah, almost 30-minute tutorial. I'll probably break it up into 2 parts on Lightroom. And for all of you who bought Lightroom on my recommendation, be sure to ask me a question, comment, anything you want on this file, and I will gladly answer any questions. Okay, thank you very much, and I will see you next time.